Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome back to an all new Sermons in the Park. As always, I am your Reverend Jamie McCaskill. I want to take this time, like I do each and every week, just to say welcome to you. You all tuning in either on the podcast or the YouTube or BitChute or Rumble or wherever you may be watching or listening. It always means a lot to me just to have you all tuning in. And I do want to address the fact that my voice sounds a little different. I am right now. I have a cold. I have a little stuffed up nose. So if you notice a difference in my voice, that's what it is. If I have to stop to take a breath or wet my lips or whatever it is, that's the reason. I have this cold. I've been dealing with it a couple of days now, and I know that God's healing it, and I won't have it much longer. So, uh, let's bow our heads and thank our Heavenly Father for all the great and wonderful gifts He's given us. Heavenly Father, we come here like we do each and every week just to say thank you. Thank you for all the blessings you've given us, the healings that you're bestowing upon us, the water that we drink, the food that we eat, the air that we breathe. All of those are gifts from you, gifts that we are undeserving of, and we just say thank you. We thank you for the healings that are taking place in our bodies that we don't notice. We don't feel them, we don't see them, but they're there. And we know that that's you working on us. And we know that no matter what, it's all for your glory and your purpose. You have a reason for things. You will make things work for you that we don't see them working for you, but they do. And we just say thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. In the name of your son Jesus Christ. Amen. So, for those of you who are new, because I know that we have new people tuning in each and every time we do one of these, what we do here is we take a book of the Bible and we do it book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and yes, sometimes very much word by word. We take that whole thing and we break it down. And what reason we do that? Just to help you understand it a little bit better. Right? I mean, there are words that have changed over time. Their meanings have changed. The way that they are used has changed. Things like that. And we just take it and we just try to make that verse make a little bit more sense to our common modern ears, right? Right now we're in Genesis. This week we're up to chapter 21, and here we are still in Genesis, right? We're still in the story of Abraham, and here in chapter 21 we are reading where Isaac is born. Right here at the beginning of chapter 21, we see the Lord fulfill that promise that He made to Abraham so long ago. And it's right at the time that He promised that it would happen. We see that Abraham circumcises his son Isaac. And that was a sign of the covenant, like we read about back in chapter 17, right? So let us go ahead and let's read Genesis chapter 21. We're going to read the entire chapter, verse 1 all the way to verse 34. And again, I apologize for the sniffling. I can't, it's just what we're going to have to deal with today. So, the Lord visited Sarah as He had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as He had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. And she said, Who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah, the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocked. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out that bondwoman and her son, for the son of that bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. Give me just a second. I need some tissue.
I have some napkins sitting on my thing.
I know. Where?
Underneath that bag. There's a bunch of them you can take with you.
Sorry about that. I had to get some tissue. Verse 11. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. And all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and took bread and a bottle of water, and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder. And the child sent her away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted her voice up and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the bottle of water, and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. And it came to pass at the time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God, that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me, and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water, which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. And Abimelech said, I wot not who hath done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard I of it, but today. And Abraham took sheep and oxen, and gave them to Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, What mean thou 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? And he said, For these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that thou may be a witness unto me. And I have digged this well. Wherefore he called the place Beersheba, because there they swore both of them. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up, and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba. They called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in Philistines' land many days. So what we do, we go back and we reread that first verse that we read, and then we break it down. So let's go back and look at verse 1. And the Lord said unto Sarah, and the Lord visited Sarah, and he, as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. Sorry, let me blow my nose again. Notice what it says. It says that the Lord visited Sarah. But we know that it was not just her, right? It was her and Abraham. This old couple, this aged couple, if you will. And he visited them just like he had promised. And what happened? Their son was born, right? A son. Just like they had expected for, how long has it been now? About 25 years? And all of that laughter that they shared, now it was turning to rejoicing. They were happy. And Sarah, she was barren. Now that whole her being barren, that's at an end now. So let's go to verse 2 now. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. God is faithful, isn't he? He always does what he says. And right here, we see his promise to Sarah being fulfilled. The verse tells us that this was, he did as he had spoken. And the reason for his visit is fulfilled. It was done in due time, right? It was the time that he said. She gave birth to a son, and Abraham names him Isaac. God is always true to his word. Always. He does what he promises. And that's what we're seeing here. Sarah and Abraham were promised a son, and they were given a son. Verse 3. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah that Sarah bare to him, Isaac. We read as Abraham and Sarah's son Isaac is born. And we know, right, that he goes on, he becomes the forefather of the Jewish people. Now, as far as his name goes, we already discussed this. Both Abraham and Isaac had both laughed. They laughed when that promise of a son was made to them because of their old age. And later, they would laugh for joy, wouldn't they? We know that Isaac represents the line of the Messiah. Later, we will of course see God test the faith of Abraham when he commands him to sacrifice Isaac up there on Mount Moriah. Isaac, in that picture, represents Christ, who is what? The only begotten Son. When he is willing to be bound on that altar as a sacrifice for his father. Now, later, of course, we see Isaac, marry Rebekah. In that, we see Abraham's faith tested as he waits for 20 years for a son. Isaac lived 180 years. He fathered both Esau and Jacob. Let's take a look at some verses here. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 17, verse 19. The app's being a little bit slow today, sorry. Everything been a little bit slow. My nose, everything. Genesis chapter 17, verse 19. And God said, Sarah, thy wife, shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. Right? Okay, what about chapter 26? We're going to look at verses 1 to 5. And there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him, and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in the seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Right? Anyway, back to the birth of Isaac here. Isaac was the son of the promise, right? The son of the spirit, not the son of the flesh. That's what Ishmael was. As I said, Isaac means laughter. It was through Isaac that the promise would be fulfilled. All right, verse 4. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. So Abraham, he goes on the 8th day, like he's supposed to, and he circumcises Isaac. Now, we can understand that, right? Besides, like the verse tells us, God had commanded him to do it, just like we saw back in chapter 17, verse 12. So as you see here, he circumcises Isaac on the 8th day, just like we read, right? Abraham was obedient to what God told him to, even here with the son that he loved so much, the son of the promise, right? He didn't even wait a day, not one day past that 8th day. We can only guess that Abraham did the circumcision himself. We can only guess that. All of this shows us just how strict Abraham was in following the commandments of God. This was, after all, the blood covenant that Abraham had made with God. And he fulfilled it just like God commanded him to. When Isaac was 8 days old, again, here we see that number 8. If you believe in numerology, 8 means new beginnings. Right? So let's move on. Verse 5. And Abraham was 100 years old when he bare Isaac. When his son Isaac was born unto him. Notice, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born unto him. This would have been approximately about 2065 BC. So Abraham was 100 when God fulfilled his promise to him. Now you know, and I know that you know that I know, that there is no way in the flesh, okay, that a man who is 100 years old can father a child. But, and I'm going to put an emphasis on that word, but, in the spirit, anything is possible, right? All right, verse 6. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. Remember, when God gave that promise, Sarah laughed, but that was out of distrust and it was out of doubt. She expresses her grateful wonder in 2 poetic strains here. The first was 2 sentences. Turns on the word laugh. There is no longer, the laugh of delight with a hint of doubt. No. This one is with wonder, with joy. The wonder and joy at the power of God overcoming her being impotent. The second and the third sentences, they turn on the object of this joy. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again. The name Isaac means laughter. Sarah, she's rejoicing. She's been blessed by God. She had a baby despite how old she was. It took away her reproach. When you're a woman, Sorry. And you did not have a baby in those days. You were looked down upon. You were frowned upon. So of course her friends are now rejoicing with her, right? They're excited to see their friend, being blessed in such a way, especially at her old age. I don't think I can emphasize enough with you guys, to the women in that time, and especially in that culture, you it was almost like you were less of a woman if you didn't have a kid. Again, I'm sorry about me blowing my nose. I know it's not. Let's keep reading. Verse 7. And she said, Who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. No one, you understand? No one ever expected to hear that this would happen. But here it was, right? She's telling them, For I have borne him a son in his old age. She mentions giving suck to the child. The time of weaning, right? And here it is, the second step of the child in existence. And their whole household is happy. They're all being happy. They're rejoicing together. And this was a custom at that time. I do not doubt that back then, Abraham, he was so embarrassed when he saw all of his friends with their children. And Sarah as well. Him and Sarah, they don't have any kids. No one ever thought that Abraham and Sarah would ever have a child together. No one. Not only that, they never believed it themselves, did they? Not until God gave them that promise. And she was probably, still in amazement that her and Abraham had a son at this very moment. Right? Let's go look at verse 8 now. And the child grew, and he weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. This tells us something different here. We're going to get into that. But notice that it starts off that, and the child grew and was weaned. This tells us what? That Isaac, he thrived. He thrived under the nursing of his mother, as well as the blessings of him, the blessings that were put on him by God. He would have been healthy. He was able to digest food, solid foods. He was weaned from the breast, right? Now, we do not know how old Isaac was when he was weaned, because there is no fixed time for that, right, ladies? The verse then says what? It says, Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. Now, like I said, this is odd to us today. So I said, this is something different here. But this is odd to us today. But why did he do this? Because Isaac was now beyond the dangers of being an infant. Because in those days, it was dangerous to be a baby. There were a lot of disorders and other dangers of being a baby. Now, they knew that Isaac was healthy. And he was more likely to live into being an adult. Abraham, he was overjoyed. This was his son. And he was now his son was able to eat solid foods. Think about that. A baby cannot get too far away from his mother back then. They needed their mother for milk. Now that Isaac was weaned, he could, Abraham could take him away with him. He could take him off and go do stuff. This was a special time for a child with their father, and Abraham had every reason to celebrate. Abraham is an old man, right? He now had that son that he was promised, and he's excited. Who wouldn't be, right? Verse 9. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Now, I got stuff right here at my feet, I'm sorry. Back to that old rivalry. It says that the son of Hagar mocking. This means that he was mocking. He was mocking the celebration. He was laughing. He was ridiculing them. And that, of course, it offended Sarah. And this is what leads her to demand that Abraham expel Ishmael and his mother out, right? Mocking is the word that is used here. And this is an intense form of the word. Because he's laughing, he's mocking them. I think that when Ishmael looked at Isaac, he saw all of his hopes, right? Because he hoped to inherit things. And that was now gone. It was shattered. Now, at first glance, this just seems trivial. But over time, this leads to a very fundamental rift. Now, using this as the background for the New Testament, this right here expounds on the incompatibility of our natural selves and our spiritual selves. Take a look with me at Galatians chapter 4, verse 29. But as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the Spirit, even so it is what? Now. Right? Alright. Verse 10. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. She's telling him to cast out, not be the heir. Just think about this. This is like breaking the law. Because you see, in the days of Abraham, the legal codes of what they call Nuzi and Hammurabi, they forbid this. You are not allowed to put out the son of your handmaiden. Right? If you have a rightful and natural heir, you're not allowed to do it. So technically, Sarah is requesting what she's requesting here. This would offend social law. Not only that, but Abraham's sensibilities and his love of his son Ishmael as well. We learn that Abraham received divine approval and assurance to overcome this before he sends them away. We see the part where it says, Cast out this bondwoman and her son. This is cited as an inspired demand when we go to Galatians chapter 4, verse 30, where it says, Nevertheless, what saith the Scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. Right? Sarah, she didn't care for Ishmael. We know this already. She certainly did not like him making fun of Isaac. No mother would. So what happens? Jealousy rears his ugly head. Sure, Ishmael was jealous. He saw Abraham pouring attention on Isaac. He would have had all of his father's attention before all of this, wouldn't he? In his eyes, this baby was taking away everything that was his. He had replaced him in his father's eyes. But Sarah was also jealous. She wanted her son to be the one that inherited everything. And that's why she demands that Abraham, her husband, throw him out. All right, verse 11. And the thing which very grievous, and the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. Remember how I said that it was against Abraham's own sensibilities. Right there it says, and the thing was very grievous in his sight. He did not want to do this. It displeased him to even think about it. He was unwilling to even consider it. Sarah, she just felt that Ishmael was being insolent. So she demands that Abraham dismiss him. So, of course, that hurt Abraham. But as we soon see, God encourages Abraham that it's reasonable because Isaac was the seed that would be called. Meaning, Isaac was not only his seed, but he was the progenitor. It was included, the seed of Abraham is the most high sense, right? Anyway, Abraham, he does it. He denies himself. He dismisses both the mother and the son. And this distressed both of them. I want to make sure you understand. Abraham loved Ishmael. Ishmael was his only son for many, many years. It had to hurt him to turn away his own flesh and blood. I think it hurt Abraham. Really do. I really think it bothered him. So let's look at verse 12 now. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of the bondwoman. And all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Now, I want to discuss this as I always do, right? But it starts off with, and God said unto Abraham. I want to make sure. Let's talk about this. Was it a verbal voice? An articulate voice? Was it just some impulse that fell on his mind that told him what he should do? God has spoken to me in several different ways, and it's hard for me to even explain how I know that it was him. But when it is, I can honestly tell you that there's no doubt in your mind that it's him. What you have to do is you have to compare what is being said to you with what the Bible says. And boom, right? We know that God told him. And he knew that he should do it. It was God who decided the case for him. And this made it easy for Abraham. God told him, hey, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad and because of the bondwoman. God was telling him not to let the suggestion bother him. Not to look at it as a bad thing or a hard thing. That it was what was right. God was going to take care of both of them. Abraham, he had no reason to worry. The verse says, For in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Now compare that to Abraham's wish in chapter 17. Let me pull it up here. Verse 18. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. This is a case where the chronologically firstborn son does not receive firstborn status. Take a look at some verses with me. Let's look at Romans. Romans chapter 9, verse 7. Neither because they are the seed of Abraham, or are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Now Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 18. And I'm sorry my cat is meowing because he wants my son's attention and my son has his door shut. Of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Okay, now let's go to verse 13. And also the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. Now, we discussed this just a little while ago, but the verse tells us, and also the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation. The bondwoman here is, of course, who? It's Hagar, right? We already read this promise back in chapter 17. It was, if you want to go look at it, it's verse 20. Here, God is just repeating this to make the dismissal of Ishmael easier for Abraham. Like the verse says, because he is thy seed. I think the verse should also add, thy son, according to the flesh, though not after the promise, like we know Isaac was. Now, Ishmael was about 17 years old at this point, and it was customary at that time for a son to go out and set up his own life. Right? Because this is the age that he was. God's telling Abraham that Abraham and Sarah had schemed and they created this problem, meaning Ishmael. Because remember, he was not part of God's plan. The blessings that God promised were through the Spirit, not the flesh. I say this over and over again, but God deals with us in what? That's right, the Spirit. God was going to bless Ishmael, but only because he is the son of Abraham. But the true blessings were going to come through Isaac, through the descendants that come out of Isaac. He was the son of the promise. And it was through Isaac that all nations would be blessed. Ladies, right here we see God tell Abraham what all husbands should know. Do what your wife asks you to do. God was going to take care of Ishmael wherever he went. All right? Let's go on to verse 14 now. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. He took her to an interesting place here. It says that he took her where? The wilderness of Beersheba. This is a wide and extensive desert, and it's at the southernmost part of Palestine. Beersheba itself is located about 48 miles southwest of Jerusalem. It's about midway between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea. It was actually called the Gateway of the Negev Desert, which is located to the south. We know that Abraham and Isaac both settled there because of what we read here. There have been archaeological excavations that began in about 1969 by a man named Johann Ronny, and he was from the Institute of Archaeology at Tel Aviv. Anyway, they found that the early Bronze Age was quite small, but there were several wells from that period that were found. And they also found permanent settlements on the site that had begun in the 12th century BC. It was fortified in the 10th century BC. Also, they saw that the city suffered massive destruction during the Assyrian invasion under Sennacherib in about the 8th century BC. The site was reoccupied in the Persian period, and it was mentioned among the villages of Judah in Nehemiah 11:27. Let's take a look at that. And at Hazar Shual, and at Beersheba, and in the villages thereof. The present metropolis, okay, is located about 1 mile, I'm guessing, west of the mound, which marks the ancient location of the city. Back to the story of Abraham, though. Like I said, it had to have been really painful for Abraham. But Abraham, he trusted in God because God made a promise to take care of Ishmael. He also had his mother with him to help him, Hagar, and she was responsible for him now. So let's go to verse 15. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. Read that opening again with me. And the water was spent in the bottle. They were so thirsty that all of the water that was in that bottle was gone. And here they were, wandering in the wilderness with nowhere to refill that bottle. Then it says, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. I want to make sure you understand something. This is not saying that she threw him down off of her shoulders, or that she threw him out of her hand or her bosom. No. It just says that he was dehydrated, he couldn't walk, and she was so weary from probably dragging him that she must have just sat him down. Maybe she even laid him on her lap. Or she laid him in her bosom. And here she was thinking, he's going to die. So she laid him down in some shade. And apparently it was just a shrub. And she did it so that the sun would not scorch him. And she left him there. I read where some people say that it was Ishmael that threw himself in the shade because he was so fatigued with thirst. Whichever way, Ishmael was humbled. He was weary. He was passive. He was under his mother's guidance. And I'm sorry if you believe that he did it to himself. But the verse here makes it very clear. His mother laid him down in the shade, resigning herself to despair. All right, let's go look at verse 16 now. We're going to continue along here. And she went and sat her down over against him a good ways off, and it was as it were a bow shot. And she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted her voice up and wept. It starts off with, and she went and sat her down over against him a good ways off. I'm sure anyone can understand this. She couldn't bear to watch her child suffer. She herself was ready to die. So she went a ways off, a good bit away, and she sat down under the shade, and the against him a good ways off, that just means that she was a little bit away. But she wasn't too far off, was she? Then it says, as it were a bow shot. Simple. It just means that it was about as far as a bow can shoot. The Jewish scholars tell us that this was roughly about half a mile. So she sat there waiting to see if they're going to live or die. Because as we see her say, I should say, let me not see the death of the child. Because remember, she came here so that she did not want to see him suffer. She didn't want to hear him groaning as he was dying. Then it says, and she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. Well, of course she would, right? She was in a terrible spot here. Here she was, out there in the wilderness, no water, and as far as she knew, her child was about to die of thirst. You tell me any mother who would feel any different way. If someone cast them off without any provisions, having to watch their child die, she could not bear the thought of watching him starve from water and food. So she got a distance away, but not so far that she could not run to him, right? If he cried out for her. She was crying for help. Not for her. She wasn't crying for help for herself. She was crying for help for her son. Verse 17. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. I like the part right here where it says that God heard the voice of the lad. Just think about that. The desperation had turned Ishmael's voice, that had been scoffing before, into cries of anguish because of his assumed death. God had heard him, and that probably reminded her of the promise that was made. What can we learn from this? I like to think that it teaches us that we can never wander so far from God that he will not hear us. Just like he heard Ishmael here. And it says that the angel here was calling to Hagar, who was also distressing, and told her, don't fear because God sent help. Now let's look at verse 18. Arise, lift up the lad, hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. I'm not even going to set the Bible down because this is very simple. Look what it says there. It says, for I will make him a great nation. This promise assures Hagar that God would take care of her son, Ishmael, right? Verse 19. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink. This phrase, a lot of scripture, but look what it says. God also opened her eyes that she saw a well of water. This well of water that she refilled the bottle from, and because of this, her and Ishmael were able to continue on. Don't ask me how far this well was. And I'm saying that because it wasn't important. Remember, her eyes were opened miraculously. The opening of the eyes could mean a lot of different things. It could mean that her mind was just cleared. It could mean that her attention was sharpened. To me, I like to think that it means that God directed her to that well. Nothing more, nothing less. Now that well, I don't think it was too far away. I think that she probably carried Ishmael there. God giving her the strength to take him so that he could quench his thirst. In all of this, we're seeing God encourage Hagar, letting her know that he's going to take care of them. He repeated that blessing. Remember, I told you a while back that the blessing of Ishmael was a fleshly blessing, a worldly blessing. Isaac received the spiritual blessing. Anyway, Hagar immediately saw that well of water, didn't she? So they went there and they drank. Verse 20. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. It tells us that, and God was with the lad, right? God was with him to make sure that he stayed healthy. It gave him the necessities of life, protecting him from the dangers of living in the wild. Also, making sure that he prospered with worldly things. Was this because he was good? No, it was because God is good. The verse tells us, and he grew, meaning he grew in stature. He became a man. And if you prefer, it could say he became great. He had great riches. He had great substance. This is the way that Ben Melech interprets it anyway. The verse goes on to say, and dwelt in the wilderness. Now, this wilderness, as I know you know already, is Beersheba. Or maybe it could be Paran. These are a place that only a wild man could dwell. As we already read before in the prophecy, Ishmael was a wild man. Take a look with me. Genesis chapter 16, verse 12. And he will be a wild man, his hands will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Right? We also see it tell us, and he became an archer. Ishmael, he became skillful with the bow and arrow. And that would come in handy. He would have to hunt for his food. And he also would have to fight off other people. Remember, he was a teenager when he entered the wilderness. And what we read here is that God was blessing him and providing for him. And what we can gather here is that he must likely he must have hunted for a living, right? Verse 21. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran. This is why I said Paran just a little bit ago, okay? Paran was called that because of a city in Arabia, Pteria. You see it reached all the way from the wilderness of Shur all the way to Mount Sinai. It was very large land. It was also desolate. It was impassable. And also there was no water there. Put it this way. If you went to Mount Sinai and you tried to walk to Kadesh Barnea, it would take you 11 days. It was located on the northeast section of the Sinai Peninsula. The area was called, or I should say, the area that we now call Arabia. We read, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. Remember, Hagar was from Egypt. And they weren't far from there, were they? Now, if you read some of the Jewish writings, you'll find that he had two wives. That's right. He divorced his first wife and he married the Egyptian. Think about that. We know that he was a worldly man, right? Egypt is considered very worldly in the Bible. And here we see him marry a worldly woman. His descendants are the modern Arabs. Now, as we move forward, we're going to read about a unity between Abimelech and Abraham, ones that guarantees the control and the sharing of the region's water and other resources. He also assures Abimelech of how fair and equitable he would be in the years to come. So let's read verse 22. And it came to pass that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Not much to say here, if you've been paying attention so far, but let's touch on it, right? Right here we see Abimelech and Phicol. They speak up and they say, God is with thee. This shows us that other people saw God's hand and blessings on Abraham. And this caused them to want to make a covenant with him. All right. Now, let's look at verse 23. Now, therefore, swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. Notice what he says. He tells Abraham, therefore swear unto me here by God. Not by some false God. No, by the one true God. The only God. The only God who an oath can be taken. The God of Abraham. Who Abimelech wants to know and wants to worship. So he knew that it would move and bind Abraham. It goes on, that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, or with my son, or with my son's sons. It is entirely possible that he had heard that God promised all the land of Canaan to Abraham, and Canaan was possibly part of his kingdom, right? He saw how great and powerful Abraham was. he also had no idea how long it would be before he would get possession of it. Could it be, in his time? Could it be in his son's time? Or how about his grandson's time? He didn't know. So he asked him to swear that he would not harm them whenever this happens. He says, "But according to the kindness I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me in the land wherein thou hast sojourned." He says, I gave you full liberty to live in any part of this kingdom, right? So he's asking that if he somehow gets possession of the whole country, that him and his sons and his grandsons would also be able to enjoy their own land. That at least they would not be driven out, but that they could live there, just like he was allowed to. He had been so close to Abraham. He saw God blessing him. He wanted to make a treaty of peace with Abraham, one that would last for 3 generations. So he reminds him of all the good things that he'd done for him. Verse 24 now. And Abraham said, I will swear. Abraham, he knew all the favors that Abimelech had done to him. He was still giving him these favors, right? So of course he agrees. We know that he had visions where he saw pieces, right? He knew that it would be 400 years. He knew. So he took the oath. The oath that neither Abimelech nor his sons nor his grandsons would ever be injured or driven out of the land. All right, verse 25. And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. This verse right here tells us that Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water, right? So before he even enters the covenant, he felt that he needed to inform him of this thing that had happened with a well. Remember, this place is hot and dry. I mean, this was southern Canaan. A well was very important. We've said this over and over here. So he complains to him that his people had taken this thing away. So Abraham, he appeals to him with reason that what happened should be adjusted in a mutually satisfactory way. Okay? That this should be taken care of so that their friendship can continue. I think this shows us how wise Abraham was. He did this before entering into this alliance, this covenant. It says that which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. This makes it seem to me like Abraham did not, or Abimelech I should say, did not know about this. They seem to have taken it away so that they could use it for them and their cattle, and that they would not allow Abraham and his people to use it. We, of course, find out later, sorry for the coughing, we found out later that Abraham dug it. How do I know this? Take a look. Genesis chapter 26. Verse 15. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines, had stopped them and filled them with earth. All right, let's go to verse 26 now. And Abimelech said, I wot not who hast done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard I of this but today. Remember, I said that Abimelech didn't know. Right there it says, and Abimelech said, I wot not what hath done this thing. He pleads to Abraham, hey, I'm innocent. I didn't know about this. Not only that, he also tells Abraham that if he knew about it, if he knew who it was, he'd punish him. He tells Abraham, neither didst thou tell me. I like that. I like that a lot. Because Abimelech's telling him, hey, you're to blame as well as you're just as well to be blamed for this as well. Because you didn't come to me sooner. You can't blame someone who's uninformed. How can you expect them to act if they don't know about it? He goes on, neither yet heard it but today. Abraham didn't tell him. Neither did anyone else. No one told him. Not until right now. Abraham had agreed to make peace treaty with Abimelech. And immediately he brought this up, telling Abimelech that his men had took this away. And Abimelech is trying really hard right here to agree with Abraham. But he did not even know until right now when Abraham told him about it. Verse 27. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. I like what we see done here. It reads, and Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech. Abraham, he shows his gratitude. He had not forgotten all the favors that Abimelech showed him. So he gives him these as a token of friendship. It also shows that he was satisfied with what Abimelech said. It also shows that he's willing to enter into a covenant. Because we discussed this before, but these animals here, they're the ones that were divided in the covenant of sacrifice. The one that the people entered the covenant would pass between. That's why we see the verse say, and both of them made a covenant. Basically, they cut up and they cut, if you will, or struck a covenant. They would cut the sacrifice into pieces, and they would pass between it. We talked about that before, remember? It was a token of the covenant, the agreement that they entered into with each other. I think I mentioned this last time we talked about this, but it's a way of signifying that the one who breaks that covenant was to be cut into pieces, kind of how the animals were. All right, verse 28. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. So, after he settled their dispute, they concluded the treaty. Abraham then goes and he gives Abimelech these sheep and oxen as a way of pledging that he would reciprocate the kindness that was shown, that they would live in friendship. He selected 7 lambs and he set them together. Let's look at verse 29 now. Abimelech said unto Abraham, what mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? After he asks, Abraham responds, right? He takes them from his hand, and they would be a witness that he had dug the well. Sorry, my nose is driving me up the wall. Verse 29 now. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set together? All right. Verse 30. And he said, for these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. Now, do not get this wrong, okay? He was not doing this, to redeem the well. He was doing it to secure his own property. No one else could claim it was theirs. When Abimelech accepts this gift, he's giving Abraham possession of it. He's acknowledging that it was Abraham's well. Remember, I don't know how much I can stress this. This is a dry land. Wells are very valuable. It was God who shows his people where they should dig wells. And here we're seeing this well is in dispute. And Abraham, he gives these lambs to Abimelech, proving that this well belongs to him. And they would be sealing their agreement with the gift of these animals. Okay? Verse 31. Wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear both of them. It says, wherefore he called that place Beersheba. Read that again. Who called it that? Was it Abraham? Was it Abimelech? Was it both of them? I don't know. That's very impersonal, isn't it? I think it should say, therefore the place was called Beersheba. Anyway, there's two reasons it's called this. One is implied, and the other is expressed. One was because of the 7 lambs. The Targum of Jonathan says, and therefore he called the well of 7 lambs. Beer, meaning a well. Sheba, meaning 7. All right? The other, which is more certain, being expressed like this. Read that verse again. Because there they swear both of them by the living God to keep the covenant inviolable. They had made between them, right? As you already know, if you read the Bible often, Beersheba was a city. And it was famous in the book of Genesis as the residence of the patriarchs, Abraham and Jacob. Right? You take a look at several verses we read. Let's take a look at some of them. Let's look at Genesis, right? Chapter 22, verse 19. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. Chapter 28, verse 10. And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went towards Haran. Chapter 46, verse 1. And Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. All right, let's move on. Verse 32. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up and I'm sorry, I know I'm butchering this guy's name. I'm going to say it a different way this time. Phicol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. It's interesting when you think about it. The land of the Philistines. What we're seeing here is Abraham having contact with early migrations of the Aegean traders. The ones who settled along the southwest coast of Canaan. These people are the predecessors of the Philistines, the ones who later oppress Israel. This makes it very clear, okay, that Abimelech was a Philistine. As for those historians out there sneering at that word Philistine, it is only being used in anticipation, okay? It's not to be taken as a thing that belongs to a period, okay? There's more than ample evidence that the Aegeans had contact with this coast of Canaan during the time of Abraham, okay? Archaeologists have found pottery left there by Mycenaean and Minoan traders from Greece. So, primitive Philistines, like Abimelech, are correctly identified as belonging to that group of people. It would also stand to reason that Abraham was a foreigner who would also seek to trade with these outsiders, who would then later, of course, grow to a large enough number to threaten Israel. Anyway, back to our verse here, because I could go on about that all day. We see them both agree to the treaty of Beersheba, Abimelech as well as his captain Fickle. They return home with confidence in the treaty, and we see that Beersheba means the well of the oath. Okay, is that good? All right, let's move on. Verse 33. Again, I'm sorry about all the nose blowing. And Abraham planted a grove to Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. This was shocking to me at first. Okay? The mention that Abraham planted a grove. If you've watched me long enough, you know why that shocks me. So I looked into it just a little bit more, to mostly to clear it up for myself, and also so I could for you as well. But a tamarisk tree often functioned as a reminder of a treaty. A treaty that took place between two well-known contemporaries. Also as a marker of one of Abraham's worship sites. Okay? It took a lot of digging for me to find that. Because then we see the everlasting God. And I like that phrase. This was a divine name, and it appropriately signified to Abraham the unbreakable and the everlasting nature of the covenant that God had made with him. Notwithstanding that he is only a resident alien in that land, it's also an epitaph of a deity called who is called on to support a treaty that was expected to be valid forever. Of course, we know that this is only one of a series of names that's used for God. I'm going to list off some of I'm going to list off some of them for you. We're not going to go read the verses, but you can go look them up for yourselves. We see El Elyon in Genesis chapter 14, verse 18. We see El Roy in Genesis chapter 16, verse 13. We see El Shaddai in Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. We see El Elohi Israel in Genesis chapter 33, verse 20. We see El Bethel in Genesis chapter 35, verse 7. Each one of them expresses a different aspect of God's self-disclosure. All right, so here we are, the last verse for today, verse 34, the last verse in the chapter. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. Read that again. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. This means many years, though. When you're reading the Bible, you'll often see the word days used for years. He lived here because of that covenant that he made with Abimelech. He had settled a good deal with him, right? They were friends. So Abraham, he lived here for many years, and he was very comfortable, chiefly in Beersheba. If you look into Jewish writings, you'll see that he lived there for 20 years. Remember, the land did not belong to Abraham, at least not yet. It becomes the Holy Land when Moses and his ancestors come there from Egypt, and God fulfills his promise. Abraham was a man after God's own heart. He did what all of us should do. Do you know what that is? Abraham prayed, and he prayed often. Abraham was a man of prayer. He loved God. He worshiped God. He trusted in God. He leaned on God, not on his own understanding. We should all be like that. We should all pray. And not just daily. I say daily, but I mean even more than that. When you wake up in the morning, pray. When you go to bed at night, pray. When you go to eat, pray. When you go to the bathroom, it don't matter what you're doing. You've heard me say it once, twice, a million times. Whether you're laying down, kneeling, or propped up, you pray. It doesn't matter as long as you pray. Lift your voice to God. Thank Him for What's amazing, guys, is when you're getting into the act of it, you get into actively praying. I found myself where I'm worried about something or I've been thinking about something and something is bothering me. There's times where I make sure that while I'm praying, I worship God and I thank Him. And there's times where I thank Him so much, I forgot what I was worried about. I forgot what it was I started praying for. I pray you get to that level with God as well, where you're worried about something and you go to pray and you're like, God, I love you. God, you're so wonderful. God, you're this and God, you're that. Lord, I forgot what I wanted to talk to you about. It must not have been very important. So, thank you all for joining me here. I pray the Lord blesses you and continues to bless you, because I know He is. I know God's blessing you. And I know God has a special blessing just for you. And it's waiting for you. Because God loves you. He loves you because He is love, not because you're lovely. Amen. So, thank you all for joining me here, whether it be on the podcast or the video here on YouTube or BitChute or Rumble or wherever you're watching or listening. Thank you for joining me here. I pray the Lord continues to bless you and keep you. I love each and every one of you, and I hope to see you all back here soon. Don't forget, Monday I will be interviewing one of my dear, dear friends, Mark Warren, who is a member of the North American Old Catholic Church, because that's something that I don't know a lot about. I know people who are part of it. I know a little bit about the Catholics because my dear friend Guy Pelton. He's taught me a lot. My mom's husband, my mom's ex-husband who died, his family was Catholic. I learned a little bit through them, just through readings and things like that. Because I'm on the podcast, and if you've tuned in, but there's a couple that I did one on the Mormons. I did a couple on Islam. I did one or two on the Catholic Church, but I have never done one on the old Catholics because I don't know a lot about them, and I just thought it would be interesting to have someone from the old Catholics on the podcast to talk about and to talk about deliverance ministry, because Mark is also a deliverance minister like myself. We've been friends for quite a time now. And he joined. He was actually Roman Catholic, and then he. This is the way I remember it. He was Roman Catholic. He wanted to be a priest and get involved, but he was married, so that kind of was impossible for him. So he got involved with the American Old Catholic Church. We'll get into all of that on that episode. Also, guys, we're not sponsored by them, but in the video down below, there's a link you can follow. You've probably been seeing on Facebook, I'm wearing a new hat that says, Jesus took naps, be like Jesus. It's a company called Our True God, and they're offering a 20% discount to anyone who's a follower of my ministry. All you gotta do is follow that link. You get 20% off of anything on their site. And it's all because of following the ministry here. So, thank you all for joining me. I pray the Lord continues to bless and keep you, and I hope to see you all here soon. And I hope that you follow the podcast, and if you haven't already, you made it this far, guys. If you don't already, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and share the video. More importantly, the most important part, share the video so that others can learn about our ministry and join us here. There's a many of people out there who are seeking God, who are looking for something like this. And if you share it, you're helping in the ministry. So God bless you, keep you, and I love you, and I'll see you all soon.